Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. I have two questions, one dealing with the encryption issue and the other dealing with our response to cyber attacks and intrusions. On the encryption issue, there are several issues. There's the technological question of can we or can Silicon Valley design a technological solution? There's the desirability question. Even if they could, is it desirable? Do we gain more from having encrypted communications immune from cyber hacking than we lose in law enforcement and IC's ability to get the content of communications? So what's the desirability of a solution if we could achieve it technologically? And then there's the economic argument. These companies have to compete overseas. There are others that are offering an encrypted platform that people will migrate to. So what do we achieve apart from harming our economic interests by insisting on a key? So I wonder if you could address those arguments that we hear from industry about this. How do you evaluate it? And on the technological issue, 20 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences did an analysis of a related encryption issue and the Clipper chip, and came up with a neutral and thoughtful analysis. Would it be worthwhile to have them take a look at this question? Is there somewhere we can go for an objective answer to the technological question that is held distinct from the economic interests at stake? Is it worthwhile pursuing that kind of a neutral analysis? So I'd be interested in your comments on the technological feasibility, desirability, and economic implications of the encryption debate. And then on the cyber front, it seems to me that there are two very different kinds of cyber issues we're confronting. There are the cyber attacks, well, actually, I guess three. There's cyber attacks like Sony, meant to do damage. Cyber threats to our infrastructure would be in that category. There are cyber theft, so economic espionage for the purpose of benefiting foreign corporations. And then there are foreign intelligence gathering efforts. And it seems to me that for many of our adversaries in this realm, like the Chinese, there's an advantage to blurring the distinctions between these. Because if they can blur the distinction between economic theft and foreign intelligence gathering, then they can justify anything they do. And it seems to me it's in our interest to draw clear lines between foreign intelligence gathering and economic theft. And yet when I hear the discussion, sometimes involving OPM and sometimes involving other things, I hear us in the IC blurring those lines. So I wish you could address that. Shouldn't we make clear what the rules of the road are, that we don't engage in economic espionage, and we want to insist that others also don't engage in that kind of theft, and think about whether there are any rules of the road in terms of foreign intelligence gathering, but keep those questions distinct. If you could comment on those two issues.
So let me, I think I'll turn for those two questions to two of our panel, and I'll start with Director Comey and then Admiral Rogers.
Okay. So I'll offer a reaction on the encryption question. Right. Thank you, Mr. Schiff. First of all, I very much appreciate the feedback from the companies. We've been trying to engage in dialogue with companies, because this is not a problem that's going to be solved by the government alone. It's going to require industry, academia, associations of all kinds, and the government. I hope we can start from a place where we all agree there's a problem and that we share the same values around that problem. When I hear people talk about the crypto wars, it throws me, because wars are fought between people with different values. I think we all share the same values here. We all care about safety and security on the Internet. Right? I'm a big fan of strong encryption. We all care about public safety. And the problem we have here is those are in tension in a whole lot of our work, increasingly in counterterrorism and criminal work and counterintelligence work. And given that we care about the same things, I hope we can all agree that we ought to come together to try and solve that problem. I've heard from a lot of folks that it's too hard. And my reaction to that is, really? Have we really tried? Have we really tried? When I look at industry today, I see companies, I'm not going to name them here, but major Internet service providers who are able to comply with court orders. because they strongly encrypt in transit and they decrypt when it crosses their networks so they can read our emails, so they can send us ads. I've never heard anybody say those companies are fundamentally insecure and fatally flawed from a security perspective. So I don't think we've really tried, and also don't think there's an it to the solution. I would imagine there might be many, many solutions depending upon whether you're an enormous company that's in this business or a tiny company in that business. I just think we haven't given it the shot that it deserves, which is why I welcome the dialogue, and we're having some very healthy discussions.
And with respect to the second part of your question, sir, I mean, I think you've correctly characterized there is no one-size-fits-all to describe the spectrum of activity that we see out there. I think that's one reason why you see response to different events are not always the same. We try to look at each event in its own context. Sony clearly, for example, in the first category, as you've suggested, an offensive act designed to create damage, versus much activity we see, which is clearly designed nation states attempting to gain economic advantage, whether that's for competitive purposes or attempting to steal insights that they can in turn generate and use themselves to develop capabilities that are of interest to them. The theft of information, I think it's one reason why to date we've tried to be somewhat nuanced, if you will, in how we as a government have responded. I think it also goes to the comments in some of your opening statements about the long-term end state I think we have to get to here is this idea of acceptable norms of behavior and what's within reason and what is not within reason. And we clearly understand nation states use the spectrum of capabilities they have to attempt to generate insights in the world around them. But that does not mean that the use of cyber for manipulative, destructive purposes is acceptable. That does not mean that the use of cyber for the extraction of massive amounts of personally identifiable information is acceptable. And we're going to have to work our way through how do we develop all that in a much more refined way than we have to date.
I have to say, sir, that of course, many of these issues that you raise are significant and are also policy issues, not really the group of people sitting here. We can try to speak to them, but I do feel compelled to make that point. And on your concern about conflating or not distinguishing between cyber threats for economic purposes or for foreign intelligence, you're quite right. It's not that we don't make that distinction, but the adversaries, notably the Chinese, do not. They don't see a difference at all in the ultimate purpose for which they extract data from us. So I just want to, kind of make that distinction. I also, and this is a personal view, with respect to that which is conducted for espionage purposes, I just would caution that we think in the old saw about people live in glass houses. We should think before we throw rocks. So these are very, as you correctly and appropriately allude, very complex policy issues.
If I could just drill down once more on both very narrowly. On the latter issue, are there any rules in the road when it comes to foreign intelligence gathering? Or is it futile to even try to develop them because if a nation decides it's in their national security interest, they're going to do what they're going to do? Or should we try to establish some rules of the road for foreign intelligence gathering? And on the first point, if Director Comey, you could just give your thoughts on what you make of the economic arguments that other companies are going to do this. There's an advantage to having healthy American companies in this area, both from an economic and a national security point of view. We're at risk of losing that.
Jim, go ahead, and I'll answer the other.
So I think it's a reasonable concern. I have two reactions to it. First, I think it's incumbent upon us as a country to decide how do we want to govern ourselves and our affairs. What's the right thing for America? There are lots of costs that come with being an American business, right? You're not allowed to employ children. You can't pollute the environment, right? We impose all kinds of rules on people that other countries don't, which is a disadvantage to our companies. But we've decided we want to be a certain way. So I think we ought to start there. But look, I'm not blind to the fact they have to compete in an international marketplace with other countries that share our values. There's going to be an international set of norms where countries that care about those same things, safety on the internet and public safety, come together and establish this is how we will act. Right? For example, I can imagine us saying, if there is a neutral and detached magistrate that has found a basis, right, under the law for this information, then it can be obtained and the company must find a way to provide it. That's the way the rule of law that governs our allies around the world is, and I think that would be an important part of any agreement that resolves this. And I hear from our allies all the time. The French want the same thing, the Germans, the British. So I think that is something that could be done.
So I would just comment that on the rules of the road issue, that I think it's fair to say the United States has more rules governing the conduct of foreign intelligence than any other nation on the planet, exemplified by PB 28, which, of course, governs particularly the conduct of signal intelligence in this country, and to some extent extends civil liberties and privacy protections to foreign citizens. I don't believe any other country does that. So we do have an elaborate set of governance tenets that influence the conduct of intelligence in general and signal intelligence specifically. Don't see too many other partners that would similarly align with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So if I may, Admiral Rogers, anything you want to add?
The only other comment I would make is, in many other areas, we have been able over time to develop a set of norms about sense of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And I think over time we'll do the same thing in this environment, but we clearly are not there yet. And I would just reinforce the DNI's comment about there are very specific things that I find foreign intelligence organizations doing in the cyber domain that, quite frankly, are illegal for us. We cannot do. I mean, it's a very different set of rules out there in many ways between us and the activities I see others engage in.